I found Mr. Giggles in a dumpster behind what was once a magic store. I'd always thought ventriloquist dummies were lame, but there was always something different about him. The moment he slid onto my arm, I felt this power. It was as though cascading waves of energy were running through my entire body. I felt strong, confident, complete. In the months that followed, ventriloquism became my new obsession. I bought countless books on the subject. This was before you could just look things up on YouTube, and practiced morning, noon, and night. Mr. Giggles and I became inseparable. You can imagine my surprise when he sprang to life one evening. I'd asked Sydney Lawrence to the dance earlier that day. It didn't go well. "But Darren," she replied, "I heard you were already taking someone." "You did?" I asked innocently. "Yeah. Aren't you going with your doll?" Her friends erupted with laughter. Later, as I cried into my pillow, Mr. Giggles spoke. "Are you just gonna sit back and take that from some dumb broad?" I sat up and wiped my tears. Mr. Giggles? Did you just talk?" My hand operated him all on its own. "Who does this chick think she's messing with?" he said. "Embarrassing you in front of everybody like that?" His head completed a full rotation. "We gotta get her for this. Nobody talks to my best friend like that. Nobody." What followed was an elaborate scheme to dump 20 pounds of manure on top of Sydney at the spring fling dance. Mr. Giggles masterminded it, obviously, and his plan went off without a hitch. It took her 3 weeks to get rid of the smell. From that point on, Mr. Giggles spoke non-stop, insisting we exact revenge for even the slightest indiscretion. And after that, we graduated to petty crimes: theft, graffiti, vandalism. I wanted to stop. He had this hold on me. Sometimes it felt as though I was the puppet. Even when we were apart, I heard this voice inside my head, ordering me how to act. One afternoon, as we were walking home, Miss Wendell's cat lunged at us. "You wanna go, furball?" Mr. Giggles shouted. I begged him to stop. Honest, I did. Miss Wendell's cat was a mean old thing, but that doesn't justify what Mr. Giggles did. And when he put his handiwork on display for the whole neighborhood to see, I knew things had officially gone too far. I locked him inside a hamper and stashed it in the attic. The end. Except it wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. Without Mr. Giggles, I was like a junkie going through a withdrawal. My arm felt incomplete. My mood hit such a low, even my absentee parents recognized something was wrong and sent me to a psychologist. I told her everything, even the part about Miss Wendell's cat. She insisted Mr. Giggles was my coping mechanism, and that his actions were really just me acting out. Think back to those times he took control, she said. Before he did, were you feeling scared or angry or upset? I paused for a moment. Well, yeah. And did it make you feel better seeing Mr. Giggles exact revenge on the people who hurt you? It did. She leaned forward with a sympathetic smile. I think we both know who was really in control. With the therapist's help, I broke free of Mr. Giggles. The urge to wear him subsided, slowly, freeing me from his dark influence. In time, his voice quietened, then disappeared entirely. Decades passed. I grew up, got married, and mostly forgot about the whole horrible ordeal. But then one night, my wife and I were arguing in the kitchen. How could you sit around playing video games for 2 days straight When my mother's dying in the hospital, she shouted. I sighed in response. We'd been fighting a lot lately. Between me losing my job and her mother's poor health, things had become tense. Our relationship was like a pressure cooker, ready to explode. Don't you give a shit about anyone but yourself? She asked. Without answering, I stormed into the hall. A moment later, I felt a peculiar pinch at the back of my skull. You didn't forget about your old pal Mr. Giggles, did ya? In an almost trance-like state, I made my way towards the attic. There, I pushed aside the boxes filled with old clothes until I stumbled upon the familiar hamper. Mr. Giggles was wearing his trademark pinstripe suit and a red bow tie. I gulped. My hand trembled as it approached the slot in his back. A tingling sensation danced across my fingertips. Jolts of excitement ran from my palm down to the soles of my feet. With a heavy sigh, I closed my eyes and slid him onto my arm. The moment I did, his mouth flapped open. Killed the bitch. I ripped him off. He looked up at me. That self-satisfied grin forever painted on his face. I couldn't keep him around. If I did, some twisted part of my subconscious might have acted out. I loved my wife more than anything. Oh, sure, we'd been having problems lately, but so did every couple. I carried Mr. Giggles downstairs, meaning to rush straight to the dump and be done with him once and for all. But then my wife shouted from within the kitchen, "Where the hell do you think you're going?" My jaw clenched. In the back of my mind, my therapist spoke in a calm voice. Think back to those times Mr. Giggles took control. Before he did, were you feeling scared or angry or upset? Perhaps it was best to face my problems head on. Oh, sure, I could get rid of Mr. Giggles, but the underlying issue would still be there. Breathing deeply, I set him aside and entered the kitchen. My wife was standing behind the counter, gritting her teeth. I raised a hand. "I've got something to say." She opened her mouth to protest. 2 minutes, that's all I'm asking for. She sighed. "I know I haven't been very attentive lately, but it's just between losing my job and..." She rolled her eyes. "But that's no excuse. I understand that now. First thing tomorrow, I'll start looking for a new one, and I'm putting a stop to the gaming. I swear." She sighed. "Promise?" "Promise." We kissed. "Honey," I said, "I've got some stuff to take to the dump. Want me to pick up anything from the store on the way back?" "No, I think we're fine." As I wandered back to the hall, my wife grabbed an envelope off the counter. Before I could leave the house, she screamed louder than a 747 taking flight. "What the fuck do you think you're doing spending $5,000 on OnlyFans?" She had opened our credit card bill. I clutched Mr. Giggles between two quaking hands. "Kill her. She'll never understand you like I do. Kill her. Then it'll just be like old times." At that moment, I realized my therapist was wrong. Mr. Giggles was real, and no amount of new age hippie bullshit could convince me otherwise. He couldn't be stopped. Not by me. Not by anybody. "Get back here, you sleazy piece of shit." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and pulled him onto my arm. Once he was in position, his head did a complete full rotation. He guided us back to the kitchen, where my wife was red with fury. "What the fuck is that on your arm?" Ignoring her, Mr. Giggles grabbed a knife off the counter, then raised it above his head. Shout out to my superfans, Sweet Black Swan and Tacy. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I look forward to creating more content for everyone.